Everybody has an opinion about this one. Your dad says, buy. Your cousin who reads finance blogs says rent and invest the rest. And you're stuck in the middle, not sure who's actually right. So instead of picking a side, let's just run the numbers. Daniel rents, Michael buys, same paycheck, same city, same starting point. Both of them are convinced the other one is making a mistake, but neither of them has ever actually sat down and tracked what happens after month one. So we did it for them. Rent hikes, mortgage interest, taxes, upkeep, home appreciation, the opportunity cost of tying up your savings, all of it. And once you actually lay it out side by side, one of these guys ends up quietly building wealth while the other one is bleeding it out without even noticing. The gap after 10 years is bigger than either of them would guess. Let's keep the comparison fair. Daniel and Michael both bring home $58,000 a year. They both live in the same mid-sized city. They both have $65,000 sitting in savings, and they're both hunting for the same kind of place. A 3-bedroom in a decent part of town, a short drive from work. Michael buys a $320,000 house. He puts 20% down, which wipes out his entire $65,000 and finances the rest with a 30-year fixed mortgage at 6.75%. His principal and interest payment lands around $1,660 a month. Add property taxes near $270 and insurance around $140, and Michael is looking at roughly $2,070 a month walking out the door before he's even touched a single repair bill. Daniel rents a similar place for $1,500 a month. No down payment. No closing costs. He takes his $65,000 and puts it straight into an index fund averaging about 8% a year. His monthly outlay is over $500 less than Michael's. No mortgage, no property tax bill, no surprise plumbing disaster, just rent and a growing pile of investments. On day one, Daniel looks like the smart one. But here's the part he hasn't clocked yet. Every dollar Michael sends to the bank is slowly converting into ownership of something real. Every dollar Daniel sends to his landlord is just gone the second it leaves his account. And that gap matters a lot more over time than the $500 a month difference suggests. For the first 3 years, Daniel is living easy. The water heater dies, he calls the landlord. The roof leaks, not his problem. He's only on the hook for rent, a cheap renter's policy, and utilities. Nothing catches him off guard. Meanwhile, his $65,000 investment, untouched, has grown to roughly $81,900 by the end of year 3, just from compounding. Michael's story looks a lot messier in those same 3 years. Closing costs took about $9,600 out of his pocket on day 1 between appraisal fees, title insurance, and loan origination. Then the recurring costs start piling on, taxes, insurance, and maintenance that typically runs 1% to 2% of the home's value every year, so somewhere between $3,200 and $6,400 annually just to keep the place standing. And here's the part that stings the most. In the early years of a 6.75% mortgage, almost the entire payment is interest. In year 1 alone, Michael pays close to $19,900 toward his mortgage, and about $16,800 of that vanishes as interest. Only around $3,100 actually chips away at what he owes the bank. That interest disappears exactly like rent does. Nobody just calls it that. Fast forward to the end of year 3, Daniel has spent about $54,000 in rent and holds an investment account worth $81,900. Michael has spent north of $109,000 across his mortgage, closing costs, taxes, insurance, and repairs, and has only built up around $10,200 in equity through principal payments. Right now, Daniel is clearly ahead. Then Daniel's lease comes up. Rent jumps 4%. That's an extra $60 a month, barely noticeable. $1,500 becomes $1,560, then $1,622, then $1,687. Each bump feels small on its own. It's never dramatic enough to make Daniel stop and question anything. It just quietly eats into his budget year after year. Now look at Michael's mortgage payment. $1,660 in principal and interest. Same number in month 1, same number in month 120, same number in month 360. For 3 straight decades, that figure never moves. This is the part almost nobody talks about. Rent is a variable cost that only ever climbs. A mortgage is a fixed cost that inflation quietly erodes in real terms. Heavy in year 1, normal by year 10, practically cheap by year 20. Daniel's rent does the opposite, comfortable at first and heavier every single year. His $1,500 rent, growing at 3.5% annually, turns into roughly $2,000 by year 10, about $2,820 by year 20, and close to $3,980 by year 30. Michael is still writing the same $1,660 check. Somewhere around year 4 or 5, the math quietly flips. Michael's home has been appreciating the whole time. At a typical 3.5% annual pace, his $320,000 house is worth about $391,000 by the end of year 6. His mortgage balance, meanwhile, has dropped to around $286,000. That puts him at roughly $105,000 in equity wealth that didn't exist 6 years ago, and he only put $65,000 into the house to begin with. The rest came from appreciation on an asset nearly 5 times the size of his original investment. That's leverage, and it's the single biggest edge homeowners have that rarely gets mentioned in the monthly payment debate. Michael is earning appreciation on the full $320,000, not just his own $65,000. His money is working several times harder than Daniel's. Daniel isn't doing badly either. His index fund, still untouched, has grown to about $103,100 by year 6, a solid $38,000 gain with 0 extra contributions. But he's only earning returns on what he actually put in. No leverage, no multiplier. And his rent is now creeping toward $1,720, closing in on what Michael pays in total housing costs, except Michael's payment is buying equity, and Daniel's is buying another 30 days in someone else's property. 10 years in, the picture is clear. Daniel has spent roughly $205,000 on rent and renter's insurance combined and owns nothing, but his $65,000 has compounded, untouched, to about $140,300. Michael has spent close to $305,000 across mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, maintenance, and closing costs, noticeably more than Daniel. But his home is now worth around $451,000 and his loan balance has fallen to about $270,000. That's $181,000 in equity sitting in his driveway. Daniel, $205,000 spent, $140,300 in the market. Michael, $305,000 spent, $181,000 in equity. Michael is ahead by $40,000 to $60,000, and that gap only widens from here. Every year his balance shrinks a little more, his home value climbs, and Daniel's rent keeps rising. By year 30, Michael makes his final payment and owns the house outright, a place that could easily be worth over $750,000 by then. His housing cost drops to just taxes, insurance, and upkeep, maybe $650 a month. Daniel, in that same year, is still writing a check north of $3,900 to a landlord, and he'll keep writing one for the rest of his life. None of this means buying always wins. If you're only staying somewhere for 2 or 3 years, buying is almost always a losing move once you factor in closing costs going in and agent fees going out. The typical break-even point is 5 to 7 years, so if you won't be there that long, renting is the smarter call. In extremely expensive markets where a $1.1 million home might rent for $3,200 a month, the price-to-rent ratio simply doesn't favor buyers. And if you genuinely have the discipline to invest every dollar you save by renting without letting it quietly disappear into a nicer car or more dinners out, the gap can shrink considerably. Most people, if they're honest, don't keep that discipline up for a decade. Daniel and Michael both thought they were making the smart move. Daniel figured he was staying flexible, letting the market do the work. Michael figured he was building something permanent. Neither one actually ran the numbers past year one. Michael came out ahead, not because buying always wins, but because he locked in a fixed cost while everything else kept getting more expensive, because leverage let his $65,000 earn returns on a $320,000 asset, and because every single payment moved him one step closer to owing nothing at all. The real lesson isn't that renting is bad or buying is good. It's that a decision this size should never be made off a single monthly number without asking what it actually costs you over 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime,